In a shocking development in the Derek Chauvin case, the Star Tribune is reporting that the feds had a secret plan. In the event that Derek Chauvin was acquitted, or if there was a mistrial, the feds would have filed a criminal complaint against Chauvin to make sure he remained locked up. Only because he was found guilty on all counts did the feds back off and not file the criminal complaint. Now they're passing it off to a grand jury who may just say no charges. This is shocking, and it strikes at the heart of our criminal justice system. The trial was effectively pointless. They were going to lock this guy up no matter what. Over the past year, we have seen widespread riots across the country. In reporting from Michael Tracy, we learned that even in small towns, riots were sweeping across the country. Where have those indictments been? Where are the criminal charges that are sticking? District attorneys are releasing these people back onto the street, and they are continuing to riot. Meanwhile, police officers are resigning en masse, retiring en masse. They are being suspended for TikTok videos, or we are now learning the feds intend on charging these people no matter what. The system is being attacked. And many thought that electing Joe Biden would change this. You were warned. We all knew. I shouldn't say we all knew. Those of us who are watching, those of you who watch videos like mine and commentators in this space, whatever it may be, warned that voting for Joe Biden would be a vote to make everything worse. Under Donald Trump, police in Portland were deputized so the feds could actually start prosecuting these extremists, and they did. However, once Joe Biden got into office, the federal prosecutor in the Pacific Northwest in the Portland area dropped the charges of many of these extremists. This is being used as evidence by the far left that the charges are not justified, even when we have videos of these people engaging in overt acts of terror, firebombing federal buildings, attacking people in the street, destroying government property. That was useful, I suppose, for Joe Biden to win, telling people that this was Trump's America and that with Joe Biden, things would return to normal. Now, it's still a useful tool for whatever it is they really want. I genuinely believe at this point, the feds want the police departments to be dissolved. And maybe many of the commentators on Timcast IRL are correct when they say the goal is to federalize police so that all police operate under the federal government. I don't know if that's true, if that makes sense, but I can tell you authoritarianism is on the rise to an extreme degree. In this story, in the story about the curfew in Elizabeth City, it's a rock and a hard place. I've warned that with the escalation of violence from the far left, you will see in turn an escalation of authoritarianism from law enforcement, from the federal government, and it's exactly what we're seeing. Now, we saw the story yesterday. Rudy Giuliani's place of work and his home raided by the FBI and electronic devices seized. All the while, more stories coming out about police departments crumbling. It's interesting that we're simultaneously seeing local police departments facing tough odds, unable to recruit new officers, yet still the federal government and local police are engaging in more and more authoritarian tactics. I don't know what the solution to any of this is, but I can tell you this story should shock you to your core, should rock you to your core. No matter what happened with Derek Chauvin, he was going to prison. It's terrifying to think that you could be a police officer just doing your job. And I'm not talking about someone who's overtly breaking the law, but they will lock you up anyway, no matter what actually happens. Let's read this story. But before we do, head over to timcast.com and become a member. Just click on the members only button on the top right. And then go to the members area and you can see a bunch of really awesome exclusive segments from the Timcast IRL podcast. We got a massive library. You'll really want to see this one we have with Michael Knowles, a big discussion about religion, especially the segment we have with Charlie LaDuff talking about corrupt journalists and the horrifying things they did on 9/11. Check it out over at timcast.com and support my work because it's possible. These kinds of conversations will result in me getting banned. I know. A lot of people say, oh, Tim's never going to get banned. He's a milquetoast fence sitter. My main page on Facebook was already booted, effectively shut down by Facebook. It's possible. So don't forget to like, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell. Check out this story from the Star Tribune. Feds plan to indict Chauvin other 3 ex-officers on civil rights charges. Ex-cop would face federal charges in 2 cases, 3 others just in Floyd case. Now, I want to point out framing is extremely important in this story. The Star Tribune is, in my opinion, burying the lead. Now, there's another story there's many other stories from other outlets. The Daily Mail's framing is a bit too sensationalist, in my opinion. The way they frame it is that there was a secret plan to indict Chauvin should he have been acquitted, and that's it, full stop. The federal government is still moving forward with an indictment on civil rights charges, but they're now going to leave it up to a grand jury. I think this is very serious, but it's important to understand the context. The framing from the Daily Mail and from many people on social media is that they were only planning on indicting him if he was acquitted. They still are moving forward with an indictment, but I do believe it's fair to say that's closer to the truth than the framing we get from the Star Tribune. They're saying they plan to indict Chauvin, but they're burying the lead. They were going to use a criminal complaint against Chauvin, a direct executive action to lock him up if he was acquitted, meaning without a grand jury at all, they wanted this man in prison no matter what. The grand jury could say no. Let's read the story. Star Tribune reports, leading up to Derek Chauvin's murder trial, Justice Department officials had spent months gathering evidence to indict the ex-Minneapolis police officer on federal police brutality charges, but they feared the publicity could disrupt the state's case. So they came up with a contingency plan. If Chauvin were found not guilty on all counts or the case ended in a mistrial, they would arrest him at the courthouse, according to sources familiar with the planning discussions. Well, I'll tell you first, you know how I feel about unnamed sources or those familiar. I don't know if it's true or not. We can trust the Star Tribune, maybe. But think about that. If he was found not guilty on all counts, they'd arrest him at the courthouse? If the man's found not guilty on all counts, let the man go home. This is freaky stuff. The backup plan would not be necessary. Why? On April 20th, the jury found Chauvin guilty on all 3 murder and manslaughter counts, sending him to the state's most secure lockdown facility to await sentencing and avoiding the riots many feared could engulf the city once again. You don't need to arrest him because he was convicted? What do you mean? Do you mean you don't need to arrest him because you fear he might flee? Or he's already going to jail, so you don't have to worry about it? You see what's going on here? They say now with Chauvin's state trial out of the way, federal prosecutors are moving forward with their case. They plan to ask a grand jury to indict Chauvin and the 3 ex-officers involved in George Floyd's killing, J. Alexander Kung, Thomas Lane, and Tao Thao. Hope I'm pronouncing that properly. On charges of civil rights violations, a source said. If the grand jury voted to indict, the former officers would face the new civil rights charges on top of the state's cases, meaning all 4 could be headed toward yet another criminal trial in federal court. The backup arrest strategy and meticulous planning over the timing of charges illustrates the complicated synchronicity of 2 parallel investigations into the most high-profile case of police brutality in decades. Over the better part of the last year, as Special Prosecutor Keith Ellison's team pursued murder and manslaughter charges, federal authorities have been mounting their own case in private before a grand jury, a group of 23 citizens who meet in secret to hear evidence and ultimately decide if there's probable cause to charge. Proving how delicate outside publicity was, Judge Peter Cahill repeatedly expressed frustration during jury selection in Chauvin's murder trial about the announcement of a $27 million payout from the city of Minneapolis to Floyd's family. As a result, 2 seated jurors had to be dismissed because they said it affected their ability to be impartial. Now, I'd like to highlight a very important point. The grand jury is meeting in secret. They don't have the same fears the public jury had in the actual criminal trial of Derek Chauvin, which means maybe they'll come out and just say there's no criminal charges to be made here. Or maybe they too will be scared and pressured by the federal government. Now, in the event the grand jury does indict, they're not saying he's guilty of a crime. They're just saying there's probable cause a crime was committed. So it will be a bold and very serious event if the grand jury comes out and says no charges to be filed, because that means the federal prosecutors couldn't even get probable cause. And it's also terrifying because of their plan to use a criminal complaint instead of a grand jury. If the grand jury says no, then it proves the feds were planning on using an authoritarian and despotic tactic to lock up an innocent man. Now, of course, the left is already saying he's not innocent because he was found guilty. I'm saying in the event he was found innocent, they would have moved to arrest an innocent man. Although many legal analysts, notably Andrew Branco, who we had on the Timcast IRL show, said there was reasonable doubt in this case. And in my opinion, as well as many others, it was the fear of violence, the terror that resulted in conviction. They say, under the contingency arrest plan, the Minnesota U.S. Attorney's Office would have charged Chauvin by criminal complaint, a quicker alternative for a federal charge that doesn't require a grand jury. So they could arrest him immediately and then ask a grand jury for an indictment, according to sources who were not authorized to speak publicly. Prosecutors want to indict Chauvin in connection to two cases: for pinning down Floyd by his neck for more than 9.5 minutes in May of 2020, full stop. Anybody who watched that trial knows that's not true. He did pin down Floyd by his neck periodically, but it was not for 9.5 minutes. He moved his knee intermittently between the back and the neck. Not saying it was good, not saying he was innocent. I'm saying that's a very important distinction. They say, and for the violent arrest of a 14-year-old boy in 2017. In the latter case, Chauvin struck the teen on the head with his flashlight, then grabbed him by the throat and hit him again, according to court documents. Considering what we've learned over the course of the Chauvin trial, I'm going to reserve judgment. But I will say, at the very least, if we can actually get accountability for bad cops, it's a good thing. Though Andrew Branco, a legal analyst and use of force expert, a lawyer, said every single case he's seen where there has been unjustified use of force, the officer was held accountable. And I think it's fair to point out that there are many instances where officers are held accountable when they shouldn't have been. But I do personally believe we can see reform. I do believe there's a problem where officers will back up false claims of other officers. Let me give you an example. If you're a fan of the show and you've watched every episode, you'll know this, but for those that missed it. During the Occupy Wall Street protest, this was early 2012, I believe in January, a photographer was standing on the sidewalk photographing the police when an officer was instructed to illegally arrest this man. I filmed the whole thing. I had been live streaming. The officers arrested this individual who had been standing on the sidewalk breaking no laws. The officer who was instructed to arrest the man did not know why the man was being arrested and then lied under oath that the man was obstructing a roadway. My video proved that to be false, and the officer was never held accountable for committing perjury, lying on official documents and in court. And I want to know why. This should not happen. Those are dirty cops. Hey, but that's New York City, Democrat run. I can't speak for Republican controlled areas because I've not filmed Republican area police doing things of this nature. But these things do happen. And I want to see accountability. This ain't it. What they're talking about in this story was straight up them saying if he was found not guilty, we'd lock him up anyway. And then we'll see if a grand jury would indict him. We don't even know if the grand jury would right now. This should not be how the justice system functions. Many people thought that voting for Joe Biden would change the system, but you made it worse. Meanwhile, as Rudy Giuliani has his office, an apartment raided by the feds, I see the supposed Antifa left cheering on the FBI because it was never about liberty. It was never about challenging authoritarians. It was about ideological domination. And when I bring this up to them, when they say things like the FBI is raiding Giuliani, haha, that's awesome. I'm like, yeah, it's really great. We love the FBI, don't we? We love what they do. Now, I don't think the FBI is all bad. I think the far left extremists are extremists. But I do think the DOJ is being politicized, and Trump didn't do this. You want to talk about fascism and authoritarianism? Let's talk about Merrick Garland coming in and green lighting the DOJ to go after Rudy Giuliani, the lawyer for the previous administration's president, for our former president. Now, look, it's tough. If somebody breaks the law, they must be held accountable. I'd love to see an answer as to why only one faction is being held to the grindstone. What about Hillary Clinton and the destroying of emails? Nothing. Because Trump wasn't a fascist. Because the establishment protects itself. And now they've got a new ideology. They're eroding and destroying this country. And this story it really should make the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. You look at this, you look at what happened with Giuliani. Now, look, Giuliani, not a perfect guy by any stretch of the imagination, but it's really scary what we're seeing in this country. Political retribution, authoritarianism. And I'll tell you, it's not going to stop. It's not going to change. Newsweek reports, videos show arrests made as Andrew Brown Jr. protesters defy curfew in Elizabeth City. The leftists who cheered on the state as they prosecuted Chauvin, unfortunately, are too blind to realize they were cheering for the state. Derek Chauvin being found guilty was not a victory for the people. It was the state. And it's funny. I had people tweet at me, it was the people versus Derek Chauvin. It's the state of Minnesota versus Derek Chauvin. It was the state that created the laws that were being enforced against George Floyd. Now, you don't have to like the fact that police are willing to enforce these laws, but the individual being punished for the system put in place by the state. You can argue it's by the people in the end, fine. The ignorant people who support the power of the state to do these things. Well, now it's going to be wielded against you. In Elizabeth City, there was a shooting. A man named Andrew Brown Jr. The typical individuals showing up, the lawyer Ben Crump coming up saying the man was executed, the family is outraged. That may be the case, I don't know. But we're already seeing protests. In this instance, the protests have been peaceful. Many people have commented from Elizabeth City over at Timcast IRL. I've received emails, and they say that for the most part, the protests have been peaceful marches. I respect that 100%. That's the way it should be. And I'm grateful these people are remaining peaceful and getting this message out and speaking up. Violence and looting that's not what we want. The First Amendment says peaceably assemble. So the city enacts a state of emergency and a curfew. And here we go. Did you think that they would not use these powers against you? Did you think that it would not be weaponized against you once the Democrats got what they wanted? Oh, they'll placate you to whatever degree they have to. So you vote for them. So you think they're the lesser of the two evils. And then they'll enact a curfew. But who does the curfew really hurt? The protesters defy the curfew. Some get arrested. Law-abiding citizens adhere to the curfew and then can't go outside. It is just getting worse. I don't care who you think is right. We don't want an escalation in force from cops, from feds, from the DOJ. But here we go. Newsweek reports. Videos captured on Wednesday night show numerous arrests being made in Elizabeth City, North Carolina, during protests following the fatal police shooting of Andrew Brown Jr. In one video shown above, several police officers with the Elizabeth City Police Department can be seen arresting a man in what appears to be a parking lot. Two others can be seen on top of a man who is laying on the ground while others attempt to move a crowd of protesters away from the situation. Police place the man on the ground in handcuffs while he can be heard repeatedly asking, "What are y'all arresting me for?" 3 officers eventually bring the man to his feet as he continues to ask what he's being arrested for. The person filming the video asks the man who is being arrested for his name and date of birth, a typical protest strategy. The video of the arrest came during protests in Elizabeth City after a Pasquotank County Superior Court judge ordered the release of body camera footage of the fatal police shooting of Brown be delayed. They go on to mention a little bit about the case. They say Brown's family and lawyer have contended that he was sitting in his car with his hands firmly on the wheel when he was shot by police. But Pasquotank County District Attorney Andrew Womble said on Wednesday that the video showed Brown hitting police officers with his car before they shot him. Then released the footage. Why not? I understand that they're worried about riots, so they enact a curfew. But I don't think that is going to solve anything. It's just an escalation in authoritarianism. Clearly, these people are still coming out. Clearly, they weren't rioting and they're not rioting. So why restrict law-abiding citizens? This is what I warned of several years ago. The escalation from the far left would result in people begging law enforcement to escalate their tactics and continue locking us down. And I am not a fan of this. It's already illegal. Arrest them and charge them. The problem, the district attorneys aren't doing it. When I was talking to Andrew Branca, smart guy, he mentioned that Darren Wilson in Ferguson was not indicted because he left it up to a grand jury, and the grand jury looked at the evidence and said, there's nothing here. And because of that, a new prosecutor got elected. pointing out, why wouldn't he indict Darren Wilson? You must vote for me. So they voted for him. The good prosecutor lost his job. The corrupt prosecutor who comes in immediately says, I'm going to review the Darren Wilson case, and then throws it away because there was no grounds for an indictment. It was a lie, a manipulation to gain political power. And it's going to keep happening. Now we're seeing the moves the DOJ is making, not just against Minneapolis, Chauvin, and these other cops. We're seeing similar things across the country. On April 26th, it was reported, Attorney General announces a civil investigation into the Louisville Police Department. Merrick Garland has confirmed the Justice Department is opening a civil investigation into the Louisville Police Department and the Louisville-Jefferson County Metro governments to determine if they violated the Constitution and federal law. They say, video transcript, according to Merrick Garland today, the Justice Department is opening a civil investigation into the Louisville Metro government. I read all that. Today's announcement is based on an extensive review of publicly available information about LMPD conducted by the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division. The investigation will assess whether LMPD engages in a pattern or practice of using unreasonable force, including with respect to people involved in peaceful, expressive activities. The reason why I find this alarming? What does peaceful mean? Well, if you follow the mainstream media and the Democrats, peaceful means burning down buildings. You know, there are people in this country who genuinely do not believe that there were riots last year. I find it curious. Joe Biden gives a State of the Union address or something similar to it. Everyone's spaced apart. They can only have 200 people. They can't have a full joint session like they normally do, even though they could with impeachment. But then we see the mass protests across the country. We're told that we're worried about a second wave and everyone's got to get the vaccine. But again, we see the peaceful protests with no masks on. It's a lie. They don't enforce the mask policies. The media won't criticize the people who are refusing to wear masks when they go out in protests. But at the State of the Union, oh, you can't have people there. This is freaky stuff, man. We are in genuinely dark times. The golden age is over. The winter season is upon us. And they say good times make weak men make hard times. I suppose we can just hope that the hard times will make strong men. From Fox News, Louisville Police Department staffing in dire straits amid high crime rates, recruitment woes, according to the union. LMPD has made headlines since March 2020, the death of Breonna Taylor. And now we can see from the Daily Mail, crisis at Louisville Police Department. They're struggling to recruit as murders rise by 75% and shootings rocket 84% in the wake of Breonna Taylor's killing. It's going to get bad. If you think it was bad last year, you ain't seen nothing yet. The Democrats control the Senate only by the election of Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. They control the House by a thin margin, and they're talking about packing the courts. Maybe it won't happen. Maybe Manchin would intervene. Interestingly, Manchin is a Democrat, but he's from West Virginia, which is the second most Trump-supporting state in the country, which I find just weird that people would do that. But I guess people in the state like Manchin, although many don't, and I don't see him. Many they liked him before. I don't see him winning in the next election, but we'll see. Tucker Carlson spoke up recently. He branded Joe Biden a tyrant over the Rudy Giuliani raid and claims anti-Trump Lincoln Project had advanced tip-off after it was touted on Twitter something big was going to happen. They're informing their allies they're wielding political power in a way Republicans never will, because Republicans are pathetic, because Lindsey Graham and Mitch McConnell are milquetoast fence sitters. I find it funny, and I mentioned this recently, that the joke is Tim Pool is the milquetoast fence sitter. I'm the one who basically started mentioning that because I found it funny. But of course, I'm principled and I take very strong stances on free speech, on riots, what's going on with Antifa, as well as Second Amendment, Constitution, for the most part. But what does Mitch McConnell and Lindsey Graham do? What do they do? What is the Republican Party doing? Nothing. They're giving in to the Democrats. They're actually trying to compromise with Democrats who just squeeze and wield political power like a sledgehammer against anyone who opposes them. And what do you get? Passive milquetoast sentiment from Republican leadership. It's worthless. And I'll tell you where we go from here. First, as I mentioned, we're going to see more riots. We're going to see more unrest. We're going to see more authoritarianism. we're going to see the DOJ go after anyone who dare oppose them. From Axios, coalition calls on Biden to form a disinformation task force. This is going to be real interesting. Axios reports a coalition of groups is calling on President Biden to create a task force that can explore ways to crack down on deliberate disinformation campaigns in ways that don't unduly limit free expression. Now, let me ask you, what do you think that means? Well, the New York Times said that Project Veritas was a coordinated disinformation campaign or engaging in one. We now know that's not true because James O'Keefe of Project Veritas sued the New York Times. And I guess the war isn't over just yet. They may have won, the establishment, in many areas. They may be gaining ground, but the fight is not over. We have not yet begun to fight, as the saying goes, as we're taking broadside cannon fire from all directions. James O'Keefe's lawsuit against the New York Times shows there's still some hope. Hopefully. They say why it matters. The spread of false information around elections, health, climate, and other pivotal issues has had a huge impact on American institutions. But civil liberties groups say it is critical to find solutions that maintain free speech protections. The prevalence of deceptions, propaganda, and conspiracy theories related to the 2020 election, COVID, and the recent Capitol insurrection illustrates the clear and present threat that disinformation poses to our democracy and national security. The group says in a letter to Biden being sent today and provided first to Axios. There was there's clever ways they launder lies. So as you may know, my Twitter is riddled with garbled nonsense jokes and mention of chickens. Yet there's a group called, I think it's called I forgot what it's called. There's an election integrity group. They claimed that there's, I think, Lynn Wood, Sidney Powell, James O'Keefe, and me were the largest purveyors of election misinformation. I find that quite hilarious because I only use NewsGuard certified sources when I post things. So I don't know what they think. But the problem is you can't maintain an absolute control of the narrative, even among sources that are certified by NewsGuard, follow the mainstream narrative. News gets out. So what they'll try to do is claim disinformation campaigns and networks. I'll tell you this. You can see in every source I use, save Project Veritas, we got this beautiful little green check mark. If you've got a problem with my opinion and the news being presented, take it up with NewsGuard. I only use their sources. Star Tribune is certified right here, 100 out of 100. Newsweek, do they get a 100? A 100 out of, well, amazing. Yahoo News, even they get a 100. Fox News, they don't get a 100, I don't think. They get a 69.5. They're not responsible. Okay. Daily Mail, they're certified 77 out of 100. You got a problem with what I'm reporting. You think it's fake news. Sorry. I don't even use conservative websites because of this. It has to be certified by the Microsoft-funded NewsGuard. But they do want to maintain lies, and it's very difficult. So after we see the crackdown from authoritarians in the DOJ, from Biden's administration and Democrats, how do you prevent unrest in the future from the undesirables, the people you don't like? And I'm not talking about Black Lives Matter. You shut down the lines of communication, make sure they can't talk, accuse them of being liars, and then try and get them banned on those grounds. CNN is also being sued by Project Veritas because they claimed that banning Veritas was part of a crackdown on misinformation. That's a lie. It's not true. Even the woman being sued by Veritas stated on Twitter herself, under her own profile, I should say, we don't know who posted it, but it was her name, verified, that it was part of, that Veritas was banned for posting private information. So how could it be both? No, you see, CNN is lying. They're trying to get actual news outlets banned. And people, man, you got to understand, James O'Keefe is one of the most important figures right now in the culture war, suing Twitter, CNN, and the New York Times. One of the very few people willing to stand up and fight and not back down. Now, there are still rules. It's like watching The Matrix, right? They mention that the agents in The Matrix can move really fast, dodge bullets, but they still must abide by the same rules. They just play to the rules better than anyone else. The establishment still has to follow certain rules because if they cross the line, it can destabilize everything and disrupt what they're trying to do in terms of gaining political power. That means, though, as long as the rules exist, you will have people like James O'Keefe winning legal battles. They've not yet dominated the entire system, but they are gaining massive power. This is scary, man. The more power they gain, the easier it will be. Like dominoes falling over, eventually the tides will turn and they will have so much momentum they can just sweep up anyone who's dissenting. Giuliani first. But according to the report from the Wall Street Journal, they're also going after journalist John Solomon. They're trying to get communications from Giuliani to John Solomon. That is a journalist. I can only imagine they're going after James O'Keefe as well. These are dark times. And if you think it's going to get better, I'm sorry. The night is always darkest before the dawn, but we have not yet reached midnight. Is midnight even the darkest point? Let's say 2 a.m. We'll call it 2 a.m. That's dark, right? We've not reached that point. So we can't give up. We must be peaceful, persuasive, and resourceful. We must understand the rules. Violence will not get anyone anything. The left can get away with it because they control the cultural institutions, but it's wrong regardless. The ends do not justify the means because we will never meet the ends. We must build the world today that we want to live in. And that means fighting with integrity, resourcefulness, persuasion, and it also means it's very, very difficult. I'm not sure we can win and that individual liberties and freedom will persist or that we will reach that beautiful Star Trek future of classical liberalism, but we must try. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up tonight at 8 p.m. over at youtube.com/TimcastIRL. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you all then.